Good afternoon and welcome. Welcome and thank you for joining today's session with us this afternoon. During National Family Engagement Month, we started off yesterday with a bang and we are following through today. I have the distinct honor to introduce our guest. I have known her since I marveled at her work from while listening to her speak from the podium, I believe around 2013 at a Georgia State conference. The next year, I got a chance to see her at a national conference, and I've been a fan ever since, and have become somewhat of a colleague. And so I'd like to introduce to you all today Miss Michele Brooks. Michele is a parent, an activist, an educator, and an advocate who currently serves as a consultant in transformative solutions in education. And she holds a bachelor's degree in educational psychology from Cambridge College and a master's degree in ed policy and management from Harvard University. Now, what I will say, all that sounded great, but Michele started off as an involved parent, as many of us on this call have had them and have been them or yet to be them. She was an involved parent who agitated folks' comfortability. And as a result, she became the founding director of the Boston Organizing Network and the assistant superintendent for family and student engagement for Boston Public Schools. And she has been recognized as one of 16 leaders to learn from by Education Week magazine. I introduce to some and present to others, Ms. Michele Brooks.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm humbled by that introduction. This is an honor for me to be here today with the office, with the Division of Empowerment, Innovation, and Partnerships. I got it right. And today I'm particularly excited because of who is in the room. And educators are, for me, the folks who shape the future. So it's an honor for me to be before you today, and I am hoping that you will take away some nuggets that will help you, that will shift your lens or sharpen your lens, and will allow you to engage with your families in either deeper ways or new ways. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about our learning objectives. And our learning objectives, because we're together for 90 minutes, we don't have enough time to do deep dives to really think about practice. So our objectives today are about raising your awareness around the impact of family engagement on student outcomes and school improvement, and raising your awareness on the research and the frameworks that engagement. Next slide. So we're going to start out with a group discussion. And I want to give you a moment to think about your two words that come to your mind when you think about family engagement or empowerment. And I want you to write them down. I'm going to give you a minute to do that. And then I'm going to give you some directions as to what you're going to do in your breakouts. Okay, so you've written, I just noticed that there are a few new people who have popped in. So what I'd like for you to do, I'm going to repeat those directions, is to write 1 to 2 words that come to mind when you think about family engagement or empowerment. So in a moment, you're going to be moved into your breakout rooms. What I want you to do, this is your opportunity to introduce yourself to your colleagues. And I want you to briefly share the words that come to mind. And in your groups, I want you to make note of those responses that you see as similar. Okay, so we're going to drop the directions in the chat box at this time. And then we are going to send you off into your breakout groups for some conversation. And you will be in your breakout groups for 7 minutes to give everyone an opportunity to speak. So it looks like we are all back. I trust that you had some great conversations. So what I want to do as we begin to debrief this is for you to drop in the chat. We're going to be looking at the chat. I'm going to be looking at the chat. Some of the words that you discussed in your group, especially those things that you found to be similar of others in your group. So I just want to drop them in so that we can share. So collaboration and respect. Collaboration, connectivity, essential. Advocacy, community essential, health connections, community connections, whole child. Inclusiveness. Knowledge and partnership. Strong commitment, challenge. All right, I want to thank you for dropping them in the box. And what that tells me is that there is a commitment here in DeKalb County School District around family engagement. And most of those words were asset-based words. Commitment, connectivity, trust. Those words denote asset-based lens in which you look at families. But we cannot deny that this is also a challenge. So I'm glad that I saw that also. And the work is challenging work, but it is very rewarding work. So I want to thank you all for that. And before we go on, what I'd like to do is to make sure when we talk about family engagement today, that we are talking from a common understanding. So I want to just go through a little bit of an exercise so that we can come up with, and I will share a definition for family engagement. But before we do that, I want to share a video that my friend Karen Mapp is interviewing a number of experts in the field about how they define family engagement. Okay.
How would you define family engagement for someone who is new to the topic?
I would define it as all of the things that families do to support their children's success, both in relation to school and in relation to society.
I think of family engagement as a public good. I think of it as a shared responsibility.
Fundamentally, I see engagement as a process of you and me sitting down and talking with each other about your child who's in my classroom with whom I'm working and telling me what I need to know to be the best teacher I can be.
I think family engagement is really about building a relationship and a collaborative experience around supporting that child.
Family engagement is really
how you enjoin families in being part of the solution for their students first and then their schools second.
Family engagement is about engaging in the life of your child in school, but also in changing our system so that your child and all children have a chance for, really a high quality education.
One can choose to set the boundaries someplace between family and the rest of the world, but it all matters.
Parents have agency. It's not we're doing to, it's we're doing with.
Engagement is a two-way street. It means letting families know not only about what's happening, but what some of the challenges are, and relying on them for real solutions.
It's work where parents, caregivers, and teachers see themselves in many ways as equals.
Okay, we're going to do another chat box exercise before we move on. And what really resonated for you from that video? What were aha moments or things you were like nodding your head to? So we're going to drop those things in the chat box. Doing with instead of doing to. Yes, that's really important. That's part of the partnership and empowerment component of engagement. Building relationships with parents. It's a two-way street, yes. Communication with parents and with students. Okay. Viewing the parents as experts about their children and asking them questions. That's really critical because parents have their children for life. And you have them for a year, maybe two. And so really understanding what you need to know about that child is important. So I want to thank you. Giving parents agency. That's part of this whole notion of empowerment, that once you create space for families, you've got to create space for them to exercise their agency. It builds their capacity and efficacy for not only supporting their children, but for supporting their schools. So I want to thank you for that. The definition that I'm going to share with you is a definition that I have used in my work in Boston. And it talks about family engagement as a process. And it's a process for building true partnership between home and school that connects families to student learning and school improvement. And I've highlighted those words because I really want to emphasize that it is a process. It's not a one and done. It's not something that comes around twice a year. It is something that is embedded in the practice of the district, in the practice of schools, and in the practice of classroom teachers. And as a result, it is ongoing and it's evolutionary. And it builds that partnership. When it is done authentically, it builds a partnership, which is a relationship of mutual trust between the teacher and the parent that really connects the families. Family engagement is really about connecting families to what students are learning in the classroom and connects them to school improvement. Okay, next slide, please. So I want to take some time now to really do a little bit of a deeper dive to help you understand the research behind this, because often we think that we know that family engagement is a good thing to do, but given all of the commitments that are on the plates of educators, it seems sometimes that it's an extra. And so it seems to kind of fall to the side, or we don't have time for it right now, but we're going to get to it. And what the research says is something very different from that. So I want to just walk you through some of this research research. I want to share with you research-informed family engagement and how it connects with instructional practice. Next slide. So what I'm going to propose to you today is a pedagogical approach to engagement. And your pedagogy is how you teach, right? It is the art and science of teaching. It is not the curriculum. It is different from curriculum. It is how you go about teaching. And so I want to say that with family engagement, we've got to begin to think about it through this pedagogical lens, and that it is not an isolated program. It is it must be a deeply embedded, integrated component of teaching practice. And all of the research that we, over the last 30 years, says that when it's a specific kind of engagement that is linked to what is happening in the classroom, has an impact on student learning and student outcomes. And so it's family engagement is this shared responsibility. If you're connecting and building those partnerships that we just talked about with families and embedding their engagement into your teaching practice, then you're beginning to have the result, the impact on student achievement. And I just want to kind of break that down. What does that look like? Next slide, please. So the instructional core is defined as the interactions and relationships between the teacher and student in the presence of content. So how does that teacher see that, view that student? That relationship and interaction between the teacher and the student has an impact on how they receive and interact with that content. The relationship between the student and the content, whether that student sees themselves or sees the relevance of that content, has an impact on that instructional core. But as we kind of unpack that instructional core, there are three other influences of what happens in the classroom. The first for me is family home culture. So when you're thinking about that, what is the culture of home? What are the beliefs around education? What are the messages around education? Not the assumed messages, but what are the real messages around education? And what are the funds of knowledge in that home that can be leveraged with that student to help them understand and see themselves in the content and build that strong relationship between the teacher and the student. So when teachers take the time to really find out who their students are, who their families are, what those funds of knowledge are, what are the core funds of knowledge that families have that students pick up and bring into the classroom? And how do teachers tap into that? The second is the classroom, the school culture and climate. That has a tremendous impact on how the teacher and student interact in that phase of content. And the third is community culture. Understanding who your students are, where they come from, and how to engage them in ways that makes the content relative to them for who they are and where they come from. Next slide, please. Okay, so there's a lot of research. There is research that says that teachers who engage families report that they have more time to devote to teaching. And I'm going to say that again, because I don't know a teacher who does not want to have more time to devote to teaching. And so when we're thinking about the engagement, the benefits of engagement, and the time that is spent, it is an investment. Engagement is an investment. When you're thinking about the time that you'll spend that you won't spend on discipline, on students who haven't completed assignments. You know, all the research says that when families are engaged, students come to school. They tend to have homework completion. They tend to have complete grades and graduate on time. So we really want to think about, from a teacher lens, how does the engagement of families affect your practice? So teachers who will also engage families hold fewer racial and social class stereotypes. And that is because they know who their families are. Relationships are very core to this work. Knowing who your families are, once you know, the stereotypes go out the window. And they tend to value families more highly. So I just want to, and I want to share a couple of examples of this. So I have 3 children, and my 3 children were, I shall say, precocious. They were challenging at times. And I was one of those parents who I had not the greatest experience within my educational journey, but I wanted something better for my children. And so every year at the very beginning of the school year, I would go and I would sit down with teachers and I would say, look, this is who my kid is. I had one that would lie at the blink of a hat if it got her out of trouble. I had one who never would lie and would be brutally honest. And then I had one whose sole being in a classroom was to figure out his teacher's breaking point. So I stayed a lot in schools because of those 3 children. But I want to share with you an experience that I had with the very first time I felt like a teacher fully engaged with me. And my son was actually in high school, and the phone rings. I picked up the phone, and the teacher was on the line. And when I saw that it was the teacher, and I just asked, I said, hold on, please. And I called my son, I made him stand in front of me because I just knew that it was going to be another one of those calls. And the teacher began to tell me how brilliant my son was in this debate, this classroom debate that they had. He was absolutely brilliant, she said. And I just wanted to share that with you. And that was the first time a teacher had called me to give me, and he was in high school, some positive feedback on my child. And so when I hung up the phone, I looked at my son and he said to me, she's lying, she's lying, she's lying. And I looked at him and I said, well, she said you were brilliant. And he said to me, he said, it's about time. And I say that to really help you understand how that impacted him. Because when he went back, he was all in her class. He was all in because she had made that connection with me, and he had had a positive experience with her. And so now he's much more engaged in her class. So engaging with families, it's not big, heavy lift things. Sometimes it's just those small things. Next slide, please. So the research also says that teacher outreach to parents that is really focused on student learning improves student progress. Giving parents actionable information around what is happening with their students and how they can help support learning at home is critical. And so this research really talks about how it impacts student achievement. Okay, and the last one I want to talk about, and I'm actually going to to share and some more details on is the work of Organizing Schools for Improvement that says strong family and community ties actually is an essential factor in turning around low performing schools and maintaining over time levels of high performance. And that's maintaining after leadership changes, teaching changes, but creating this culture that absolutely maintains high levels of performance. Next slide, please. So Organizing Schools for Improvement is research that was led by Tony Breik, and they looked at about 100 schools in the city of Chicago. Half of them were high-performing schools and others were not. And what they did was they looked over time at schools that were similar to see what was it that really, what were the elements that made these schools, these 50 schools really succeed, and what was lacking in those other schools. And so what they did was they looked at those schools, they looked at data, they looked at practice, they looked at culture, and they came up with a 5 essentials for school improvement. Next slide, please. And this is what that looks like. And so in the purple box with the triangle, you'll see the instructional core. So we talked a little bit about the instructional core and how important it was. Instruction is important, it is essential. But what they said was having a strong instructional core that was influenced by these 5 essentials. And the number one driver for that change was leadership. And that should be no surprise to anyone. Leadership is a driver for change. And so it's a specific kind of leadership. It's a collaborative leader, a leader who is supportive and really understands how to create a community of learners and support a community of learners. The second is professional capacity, which means that everyone understands what they are, everyone understands what they need in order to be successful in the roles that they're in. So teachers, there's constant peer-to-peer conversations and peer-to-peer learning and professional development. And not just for teachers and professional staff, but for parents, for everyone. There's they build the capacity of everyone to understand their roles and how they can support the school to improve. The next thing is this whole notion of a student-centered climate that is really grounded in safety, not just physical safety, psychological safety, and intellectual safety. So looking at the whole child and having everything that they do focused and centered around that child. And then there is the parent and community ties. The parent and community ties are described as teacher outreach to parents. And I'm going to say that again. It's described as teacher outreach to parent, and then parents' responsiveness. And the third indicator is the level at which the teacher is able to engage the community and the culture of the students in the classroom. So really figuring out, who are my students, where do they come from, and how do I leverage those influencers of the instructional core to improve my practice. The last one is instructional guidance, and that's really making sure everyone knows what students should know and be able to do, including parents. So really making sure that this is a community that is surrounding children and have embraced a culture that absolutely has turned the schools around and maintains that level of performance. Next slide, please. And this, I just want to share just one little data point from this, so that you can see exactly what these 5 essentials actually do when they are strong. And so this is the likelihood of substantial improvement in reading and for elementary schools with with strong supports and weak supports. In yellow, those are weak supports. So those, if you have weak supports, the likelihood of substantial improvement is 16% or less. But when you have strong supports in each of those areas, and all of those 5 areas are equally as important, is one of the things that they found. If you pull away one, then the others begin to drop. So it's a combination, it's a recipe, if you will, for school improvement. So, and I want to just highlight that when you're thinking about the family engagement component, the likelihood of substantial improvement given weak or strong supports, it's 40%. You have a likelihood of 40% of substantial improvement in reading when you engage families in the ways that I described. Teacher outreach to families, families' responsiveness, and bringing the community and the culture of the students into the classroom. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are going to stop here and we're going to have a 5-minute break. And when we come back, we're going to now move from the research into practice. I want to really walk you through some ways to think about your practice. We're going to look at your current practices and think about ways to sharpen that lens and sharpen those strategies. So we're going to break for 5 minutes. So we've just talked briefly about the research and what the research says. The research clearly says that family engagement is an essential part of instructional practice, of school improvement, and it has a great impact on student achievement and student outcomes, not just achievement, but student outcomes. So now what we want to do is we want to really think about that research, and we want to say, what does it look like in practice, right? Because research is here, but practitioners are on the ground. So what does that mean? What does it look like for me? How can I leverage what the research says in my practice? And that's what we want to talk about right now. And so we're going to start, next slide, please. We're going to start by looking at what you do. The one thing that I am sure of is that every school, every teacher does something to engage families, something to engage families. And so what we want to do right now is I want you to, just like we did before, I want you to write down 1 or 2 ways that you, as an educator or your school, engages families. And I'm going to give you a minute, and then we're going to put you in breakout rooms. We're going to put the instructions in the chat box so that you'll have them when you go into your breakout rooms. And when you get into the breakout rooms, I want you to briefly describe the items that are on your list. And I want you to talk about just give very briefly, what is it? What kind of responses are you getting from families? And what is the purpose of those activities or strategies? Okay. And again, I want you to note any similar approaches? And so we're going to break you out put you in your breakout groups now, if there aren't any questions in the question box. Okay, so we are all back. Hope you all had some really great conversations, and it also was an opportunity for you to share some of the work that you're doing in your schools around engaging families, and maybe, and hopefully that you've learned maybe a few tidbits from each other. So before we move on, I'd love to hear what those strategies that were on your list, what were they? And what were some of the things that you talked about in your groups? I think we have an opportunity to hear from some folks. And what I'd like to do is, if you'd like to share, then I'd like for you to raise your hands. I can't see everyone, but I'm going to ask Anne if she would just select folks, and you can share. And if you don't feel like sharing by unmuting, then you can also drop in the chat box. So we'll do both. Great.
Ms. Coward?
So, Michele, we were in a conversation, or I was in a room with Mr. Jabari Cobb, and it was an interesting conversation. I'm going to ask him, I'm going to put him on the spot and ask him to share, because what we were talking about is the fact that he deals with our students who are in trouble and has to be placed somewhere. So it's always a bad conversation when he has to connect with a parent. But what his thought process has been lately is, what can we do to stop you from getting here, right? And that was a connection for us as a team to collaborate, because we're going out and meeting with families and also being able to lift up that conversation in communities where we can say, here's what happens if you do this, right? So that will be his answer to what can we do for you not to get here. So Mr. Cobb, if you would elaborate, that would be great.
Well, now that you called me out, Ms. Coward, I have to elaborate. Thank you so much. No, I appreciate you, Ms. Coward. It's no problem at all. And thank you again. I appreciate you guys being on here. We discussed, and I think it's going to work out being an organically cross-sectional adventure. I was telling Ms. Coward that I had the opportunity to talk to Mr. Tanya Winters-Buford several months ago, and we had a great conversation about things she was seeing her in, and the ball just got to be spinning. And so I guess now it feeds to Ms. Coward's thing about interacting with families and trying to beat the negative, get in front of the negative, get in front of things that are happening. So that when we do discuss, and I like yours, Ms. Brooks, if there is a tough conversation, we've already built the rapport. So it's not just Mr. Cobb, the hearing officer person who's telling your child that they're going up the hill to alternative school, but it's Mr. Cobb who tried to give you some practice strategies, tried to glean what I'm saying in my office, talk to Mr. Tanya and Ms. Coward, say, guys, these trends are happening. And I think we can get in front of this if we put our heads together. I don't have all the answers, but I do have some information. I have my part of it. You have your part of it. Let's try to get in front of this thing so that we can have more positive conversation with our kids and keep them engaged in instruction. They got to get 24 units to graduate. I'm about 24, not hours, but units to graduate. And I'm seeing things that are stopping that process, especially with some of our non-native populations. There's some trip ups starting to happen with that population. I wish I could be more proactive in getting ahead of. Because I told her once I turn my microphone on, I have that hearing, it's going to be different from that point on. I make the decisions. But if we can get information to them, they have to see me maybe in a more positive light, and now they can make decisions. And I don't make decisions for them. So that's my 30-second diatribe.
Okay, thank you so much. And that's really, really important, that when you build the relationships with families on the front end, when there is a challenge, you already have a relationship with you. They know that you are someone who has reached out to them and who has extended themselves to them, so they're more apt to trust you. And that's critically important. Some of the things that are in the chat box are building capacity for parents to monitor their scholars' progress and advocate for their needs. That is critically important. And to the extent that schools are actively engaging families around how to advocate for your child and how to monitor progress, says that you move beyond this defensiveness to be open and have those hard conversations and create hard conversations around being open for parents and being able to reach out and be vulnerable. Because sometimes you're struggling and you may be struggling with their child, but to be honest and open and have those conversations and build those relationships, it makes those conversations look differently. So we have book projects, teacher collaborations. Anyone else have any other hand raises?
Yes, we have Ms. Charlotte.
Oh, sure.
Yes, hi. Something we do here at Smoke Rising is a part of the culture. Someone said, oh, you're in that new building. I said, well, you know what? They brought the culture with them. We sent a peek of the week home to parents. It's posted online and through Class Dojo. So as each grade level is working through the different units by content area, parents get a bird's eye view, or sometimes if they think really deeper, they have an educational background, they know exactly what we're working on in the classroom, whether it's ELA, mathematics, science. And it allows us to have conversations other than the behavior piece, so they're less defensive. And I'm speaking from a personal standpoint, because for me, as I make parents with partners, as partners, I can hear in their tone, and sometimes in the tone when they write messages, because of someone else's prior experiences of always seeing the bad in their child, I'm able to come from a different angle and highlight, this is what we're working with, and kind of like you, Mrs. Brooks. And I like to see the multiple intelligence in all children, because I want parents to stay on board with me. Tell me more about your child. How can I push that child? So I know I'm saying a lot, but that peak of the week really works here.
Yes, great. Thank you. That sounds like a great strategy. And I think that it's really important that when you're thinking about your strategies, that you're really thinking about how are you engaging families so that they understand that this is part of your culture. How do you make it part of your culture? Okay. All right, so what we're going to do now is I want to share with you a framework. And this framework includes a set of process conditions, but I want to give you an overarching understanding of the framework. In 2011, the Department of Education under the Obama administration commissioned Karen Mapp to really think about this whole notion of what is it? What does engagement mean, and what does effective engagement look like in a district? And that the department had been grappling with that. And so Karen went out and she visited districts around the country. She talked to experts. And as she compiled this work, what was developed was what is known now as the dual capacity building framework for family school partnerships. And it starts out thinking about a challenge. What is the what is the dilemma of practice that you're trying to solve? And the challenge that, as she names it in this, is around educators, and educators who have not been exposed in any real way in their pre-service training to family engagement. Just a show of hands of folks who are educators in your pre-service, how many of you have a full course, not a lecture, a full course around family engagement? Anyone? I see a lot of heads shaking. No, I don't see. Just raise your hand if so. That is part of the dilemma of practice that the dual capacity building framework addresses. So we have one, great. And so when you think about the fact that they've received minimal training, and they might not see, because of how they've been trained, they might not see partnerships with families as their job. My job is to educate children. I need teaching and learning. I need to have my classroom in order. I need to have my classroom practice, get my content, and be able to deliver that content. So they haven't developed an appreciation for that. And some may have deficit mindsets when it comes to the families, especially if there's a difference in culture. There may be some stereotypes that are in the back of their mind, or some deficit mindsets. You know, I do this a lot with districts, and often when I ask folks to write one or two things about when you think about family engagement, and you know, I'll think about, they'll say, our families are poor. Our families work 3 jobs. Our families are in poverty. They don't care. Those are all those deficit mindsets. And so really, how do you help shift that practice lens of teachers from those deficit mindsets, from thinking that engagement is not something that is going to benefit them in their instructional practice? The other side on the dual capacity building is the fact that families don't always have the best experience with schools, either their own educational experience or the experience of when they try to advocate for their family, for their students. And you know, I often think about Sarah Lawrence Lightfoot's description of the ghost in the room in the parent-teacher conference. You know, everyone carries the baggage, and I know I do. I did, especially when my kids were in school. I carried the baggage of how I was treated as a little Black girl in Boston public schools. And so with my kids in Boston public schools, I wanted to make sure their experience was not going to be like mine. So there were times I was the out of control mama bear. And so that was part of my ghost. So we have to understand that we all carry the baggage of our experiences with us when we walk into a room, and we sometimes relive those experiences. The other thing is, we have a lot of families who are new to education in America. And so they don't actually know or understand how education works. And they are not clear about the limits or the extent that they can advocate for their children. Parents also don't know how to get information sometimes. So when you look at these challenges, what we began to see that when we began to kind of close the gap on that challenge, what happened was, next slide, please, was a set of essential conditions emerged. When Karen looked at all of the data that she had collected from districts around the country, these process conditions emerged. And we call them process conditions because if you embed them in your process of developing strategies, you're most likely to have developed strategies that, number one, were respectful and that will get parents to respond, and you'll have developed strategies that will impact student outcomes. So the first process condition is elements of relational trust. And relational trust is critically important. It's the foundation for family engagement. It is the foundation for family engagement. If you do not have a relationship with families, then they're less likely to respond to you. All right, I've been working with a district in California, and they're like, the parents, we send communication, they don't respond. We tell them things, they don't, and we just need them to really respond. And my question to them was, for what? What do you want them to respond to? Why do you need them to respond? And they said, well, because we're sending them information that's important to their children. And then my next question to them was, have you had a conversation with them about what's important, what they think is important for their children? Well, no, we haven't done that. So really thinking about, how do you build that relationship of trust? And so when you think about relational trust, and trust in schools is another piece of work led by Anthony Bright. They identify 4 key areas. The first is respect, that there's mutual respect among the adults in a school. That's teacher to teacher, teacher to administration, and teacher to parent. That there's a sense of mutual respect. So when we're thinking about these process conditions to begin to think about our strategies and sharpening our strategies so they're more impactful, they've got to begin with relationships. And if you already have relationships with your families, then you begin to think about, okay, so how do we sharpen it? So this whole notion of respect, competence, that parents are confident that you have the competence to teach their children. And that teachers have the confidence that parents are competent enough to support their child's learning at home. 2-way. And integrity. That when there is trust, there is integrity, that we do what we say we're going to do. One of the biggest deterrents to family engagement is districts, teachers, schools often do not follow through on what they say they're going to do. And I found that when I went into Boston Public Schools, we were doing all kinds of town halls. We want to hear from you. We want to hear from you. Parents would come out in droves and pour out their hearts. And then that information would go back into a dark hole and business as usual. So by the time I got there, we would say, come on out. We want to hear from you. Listen, we've said everything we need to say. You all keep asking us to come, but you're not doing anything with it. So in order to build that trust, we had to follow through on our commitments to families. So thinking about those commitments that you make to families at the school level and at the classroom level. How do we keep our word to families? Because when we do that, they will reciprocate. And personal regard. What is the saying? They won't care what you know until they know that you care. It's really about holding each other in high levels of personal regard. So when you put all of that together, those are the components of trust. So building relationships of mutual trust is key. It's foundational for any family engagement to be successful. Next slide, please. The other process conditions are linked to learning. There's 30 years of research that says engagement that is linked to learning has the greatest impact on student outcomes. And I'm going to say that again. So it's not the bake sale. Bake sales have their place. It is not the fact that you have 100 parents that come out to an event. And I'll give you an example. When I first got to Boston, my staff, the staff who was in the family engagement office, they were dynamic. They were out in the schools, and they were really thinking about, getting parents out. That was their goal. So we had a report out, and it was like, oh, we had 300 parents come out to the school for the multicultural dinner. And I said, so tell me about the multicultural dinner. Well, everybody bought a dish, and they, you know, we played music and people ate and then they left. That's great for building relationships, right? It creates a social atmosphere where teachers and can interact with parents, parents can interact with each other. But what I said to them was, I said, so what did parents know differently? What will parents do differently because they came to this multicultural dinner? What will they know and be able to do? And it was, you know, deer in the headlights, right? And so what I propose to them is that they think about shifting the next multicultural dinner, because they did them on a regular twice a year. On the next one, let's think about doing something different. And so they got with the with the instructional coach at the school, and they came up with multicultural literacy. And so they had children's books in the languages of some of the that they could find in some of the languages. In other languages, that they enlisted parents to tell stories, to share stories and folk tales from their culture. And they gave everybody had a little card that said, these are the questions that you should ask your child about what they're reading and what they're hearing, if it's storytelling. And so when they left, parents left with books, parents left with a way to really support the literacy development of their students. And they went home and teachers began to see things happen. So these process conditions are tried and true. And so thinking about link to learning, I think that after your relational, linking things to learning is most important if you want to begin to have an impact. Then you've got to have your strategies must be asset-based, not looking at parents as through a deficit lens, that they're poor, they can't read, they don't speak English. Every single parent, every single family has assets. So really thinking about how do you create a space for those assets to be honored and respected. And in that process, your strategy must be culturally responsive and respectful. So understanding who your students are and where they're from, and being able to understand their culture. The last two are really about the mechanics of your strategy, making it collaborative and interactive. Those are grounded in principles of adult learning. When you are developing strategies for families, you must be mindful of the principles for adult learning, because they come into play. Parents, just like their children, do not come as blank slates, and you are not pouring your knowledge into them. They come with knowledge, they come with experiences that will not only, that will enrich what you're trying to do if you create the space for them to collaborate with you, collaborate with each other. And the other piece around this whole notion of collaboration is when you have built the relationships with families, the next step is co-creating with them. Co-creating with them. Kathleen Hoover Dempsey's work talks about families tend to be more engaged when you have created an environment where they can co-create their way that they want to be engaged. You know, a lot of schools, they'll say, we did this, we did that, we did this. And I know some of you might even have this experience, and the parents didn't come, we only had a handful. And so if you want to know why they're not coming, you've got to ask them. We have to step out of our own mental model of what engagement is into a model of what engagement can be when we co-create with families. Because there's one thing I want you to remember. When a child is born into a family, that family creates a circle of engagement around. They're engaged with that child. And it's a circle of engagement that is there. Too often we say, we have a circle of engagement at the school, we want you to join. My theory is this: if you build relationships of trust with families, they will open their circle of engagement because that's the one you want to be in. And they will welcome you in, and they will co-create with you ways that they can be engaged. But then once they say, this is how I want to be engaged, you've got to make it happen. Okay, next slide, please. So what I'd like to do is a quick poll to see. I want you to go back to that list. And I've just talked about these 6 process conditions. And what I'd like to do is to see how those strategies that you identified stack up. So if the strategy that you talked about met all 6 out of 6, if they met 5 out of 6, 4 out of 6, 3 out of 6, 2 out of 6, 1 out of 6, or they didn't hit the mark. We just want to see, where was that? Great. So those of you who have 5 out of 6, 6 out of 6, 4 out of 6, drop those strategies in the box so we can share them. Drop those strategies in the box so that you can share them. This is great. Okay. Next slide, please, because we are almost down to the wire. Time flies. I want to share with you this video, and I'm gonna end the poll. Okay, and this video on the impact of family engagement on teacher practice.
With the teachers that I've interacted with, I've seen them grow a lot since I first came to the school.
I don't even think I even knew what family engagement kind of even was until that PD session that kind of just not only changed my whole life, but changed the whole school, changed the way that we see things, where we spend our money, what we choose to do.
What really warms my heart is when your parents feel like they trust you enough that you can bring things to you and ask for help. I think that's one of the most awesome things about this in partnership.
It is work, but it's worth it. It is absolutely worth it, and it's life-changing. I mean, it will invest you as a teacher in a way that you weren't before. You know, all teachers were invested in our kids, of course, but I think when you are really become like a part of that family, you're not gonna fail that kid. Like, you are gonna fight that much harder to get them what they need and to keep that promise to that mother or to that father or grandmother that I'm here for you, I'm here for your family, I'm gonna do what it takes so that your child is successful.
Even when I have to have, tough conversations with parents and I don't get the response that I want, it's never oh, I'm judging you right now. Now I don't have love for you. Now I don't like you. Now I'm not gonna work as hard for you. It's, man, I wonder what's going on. Like, hey, there's something going on and you need some help, like, let me know. Because I actually know you care about your kid, right? I automatically now always come from a place of care, and of love. And I'm not selfish with my love anymore. In the beginning, I was very selfish with it. I decided who I was gonna do what with. But now it's just made me just a better human being. Because I just think in general, I always think not to judge, but first to ask questions and try to figure out what to do. And I was never like that before.
Everybody says, well, Johnson, if you're going to be a principal somewhere else, where are you going to go? And I'm like, I don't want to go anywhere else because this is family. When you engage families in the way that we have, you feel like you're leaving your brothers, your sisters, your cousins.
I feel a responsibility to these kids and to these parents. After teaching, sibling after sibling, I can't imagine, the day I say I'm not coming back to Stanton next year because I would never hear the end of it. I mean, that's a huge reason why I think a lot of us stay, is because we love these kids and we love these families.
I just want to talk to you about these three key pieces. That when you're thinking about your engagement work, your engagement practice, I want you to think about a pedagogical approach, one that really demonstrates how engagement can impact outcomes. The pedagogical approach says teacher efficacy improves when they engage families in ways that impact their practice. The other is the engagement of families is in student learning and school improvement is an essential element. We saw that in the research. And the foundation of engagement practice, and I've said this over and over again, it's relationships. Karen Mapp, whenever she talks about family engagement, she said, how they in real estate, they say location, location, location. Well, in family engagement, it's relationships, relationships, relationships. And next slide. So as we get ready to close, I do want to share with you some really great resources. The first is Steve Constantino's Engage Every Family. This is the second edition. It's really powerful. And then speaking of powerful partnerships, it's a scholastic book written by Karen Mapp and two very engaged teachers. And Beyond the Bake Sale, which I tell people that's the Bible for family engagement. If you want to know how to engage, it's step by step. Beyond the Bake Sale does that. Okay, and the last and I think most powerful resource that you have in DeKalb County, next slide, is your Division of Community Empowerment, Innovation, and Partnerships. They are doing an absolutely amazing job. The work that is being done in DeKalb County has gotten national recognition. Folks want to know what's happening in DeKalb County. So you're in a space with a team that is highly capable of supporting you as you continue on this journey of engaging families. And with that, I'm going to hand this back over to Tanya.
Well, I'm over here, my feet fluttering, because it's always an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much for gracing us for this session. It blows my mind every time I get a chance to sit in front of you. So thank you so much. Now, we had a little raffle and we picked out a few little gifts for about 7 of our participants. So I'll go really fast. I have the participants' names and I do know how to contact you. So first we have a copy of Engage Every Family by Steve Constantino, which is one of the great resources you spoke of. We have 3 copies of this book, right? Next, we have a nice little, where I was needing somewhere to put our paper. You know what, let me take my background off. We always need somewhere to put our themes. And we don't ever have enough. We can never have enough portfolios, folders, and whatnot. So here is this nice folder from our department. Place for your cards, your business cards, keep everything in place. If you couldn't see the book, here it is. I have a background now. And hold on, because it's heavy. I found out the hard way. We have 2 of these classroom reader science kits that we are giving out. And we will contact you. Let me call the names. Carol Perry, Shelly Kate, Lucretia Walker, Charlotte Lovely, Latanya Upshaw, namesake, Veronica Felton, and Leslie Taylor are our winners today. So thank you guys so much for participating. You know where to find us and you know what we do. So call us, we're here to help you. Thank you. Ms. Coward, did you have any words to take us out?
I am good. I am absolutely sitting here saying what a wonderful opportunity for us to engage with our school staff and some of our district staff as well. My only wish is that every teacher had the opportunity to embrace Ms. Brooks as we have today. But the good thing is this video will be available for viewing on our YouTube channel. And I know we have another session that's coming up for our PAC families. And I know that there's going to be other opportunities once the other staff members hear about the wonderful information that was shared by Ms. Brooks, and we will just have to bring her back. We're hoping that she will come and join us face to face sometime in Atlanta so we can do something and be able to share more with our schools and our school staff. So thank you again, Ms. Brooks. It was a pleasure. Thank you all for joining us today. And we look forward to additional collaboration with our school staff, because the framework that was shared today is the framework that we have adopted as a part of the framework for family and community engagement in our district. So we will have to build that out sooner than later. So if any of you on this call is interested in being a part of that team that will build this out for the district, please let us know, because we can't do it alone. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
All right. Take care, everyone.